By 2032, ACT will empower 20.2 million more learners to exit high school ready for post-secondary and work opportunities. We will concentrate our work around 5 strategic pillars: build, inform, connect, mobilize, and partner. We are collaborating with key stakeholders to bring this bold new vision to life. We've got our work cut out for us, and with your support moving forward, we will make it happen.
Hi friends, Angelica Vanetta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to visit our website at inclusiveiowa.org for information on upcoming events and to sign up for our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Welcome to the Iowa Ideas Conference and this morning's session, Intellectual Diversity and Polarization, which is within our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Higher Education tracks. I'm Tom Barton. I'm the Gazette's Deputy Des Moines Bureau Chief, covering Iowa politics, including the Iowa legislature and campaigns. And I'll serve as your moderator today, helping to guide today's discussion and conversation as part of Iowa Ideas, which seeks to explore the issues, address challenges, and share the big ideas that will shape the future of Iowa. I'd like to recognize our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, which helped make this free virtual conference possible. This session is also being sponsored by ACT, Inclusive ICR, and Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust. So again, thank you to our sponsors who helped make this discussion and this conference possible. We really appreciate it. A reminder that audience members can submit questions to our panelists in the Q&A, excuse me, in the Q&A chat box in Whova. We ask for and we encourage people to submit their questions. We want this to be a really healthy and robust discussion, and we want to know what's on your mind and the things that are important to you about this discussion. As I mentioned, today's session is titled Intellectual Diversity and Polarization: Navigating the Seas of Political Polarization and Culture War Issues Pose Unique Challenges for Universities. What are the risks culture wars pose to Iowa's colleges and universities, and what impact could that have if students align with like-minded colleges or avoid states where majority party politics differ from their own? Those are some of the things we hope to delve into and discuss today during this panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists. With me today are Nick Covington. Nick taught high school social studies at Ankeny High School for 10 years before becoming creative director of the Human Restoration Project, an Iowa-based progressive education nonprofit that works with educators, students, and schools across the country to promote systems-based change and restore humanity to education. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for being here.
Morning. Thanks, Tom.
Yep. We also have, excuse me, Hemi Collier. Hemi is the Senior Diversity Officer and Director of Intercultural Life at Cornell College. He has more than 15 years of educational experience, either as a coach, mentor, teacher, administrator, with expertise in diversity, athletics, education, leadership, and organization building. Welcome, Hemi.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Next, we have Jed Peterson. Jed has taught as a professor of history at Kirkwood Community College for 20 years and served as a school board member for College Community School District. At Kirkwood, he serves as a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fellow and as a club or faculty advisor for both the History Club and the Kirkwood Black Student Union. At College Community, he serves on the DEI Advisory Board, Finance Committee, and the Facilities Committee. Welcome, Jed. Thank you for being here. All right. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and efforts to recruit and retain faculty and students of color are facing cutbacks and legal and political attacks, both statewide and across the country. While college administrators say their DEI efforts are an effective strategy to repair decades of exclusionary policies and practices that repelled communities of color from their campuses, Republican leaders say the practices violate free speech and break anti-discrimination laws and are a misuse of public money. Colleges, too, right now are wrestling with the implications of a landmark Supreme Court ruling that struck down affirmative action in higher education and precipitated a new wave of challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the private sector. Here in Iowa, state lawmakers this year passed a measure barring its public universities from any new spending on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and training. State Representative Taylor Collins, a Republican from Minneapolis, said in February that, quote, "For too long, the DEI bureaucracies at our institutions of higher education have been used to impose ideological conformity and promote far-left political activism, all while spending literally millions in the process, claiming that they push a quote-unquote woke agenda on faculty, that they push it on staff, but most importantly, they push it on students." In response to the legislative criticism, Iowa's Board of Regents in March initiated a review of all of its diversity and equity inclusion programs, anticipating a report and recommendations based on based on the findings. It also directed the campuses to pause implementation of any new DEI programs for now. So that's kind of the landscape, the environment here in Iowa. Himi, I want to lead off this conversation with you. In the discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion, there often seems to be a lot of misconceptions, right, about what DEI is and is not. For example, critical race theory is often mentioned when talking about DEI, the same with affirmative action. What are we talking about when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are we describing? What does that encompass, and what are the component parts?
Well, first off, once again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me on this panel this morning. And so it's an honor to be here. So that being said, I'll start with, like, when we talk about like DEI, right? Like the first misconception is when you think DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion, that it's only talking about race and ethnicity, right? It's race, ethnicity, and if you want to add in gender from time to time and sexual orientation, and then it stops there, right? That's not what DEI is, right? DEI it's talking about all aspects of life, and including those things, right? Whether it's spirituality, whether it's geographic diversity, height diversity, so on and so on. There's all these different things when we talk about DEI. And then one of the misconceptions is when we looking at when we look at DEI, and even as we're saying it here now, DEI as if that's one term and it all means one thing, right? There are three completely different words within that, right? Starting with D, which is diversity, then the E, equity, and inclusion in the I, right? And so those are three completely separate components of what we talk about DEI. Yes, we use them together because it's short or whatever, but I think we know, you have to start with, trying to define what do those three things mean, right? So first, you talk about diversity, exactly what I just talked about, just different aspects of people's lives, including include all the things, as I said, race, ethnicity, gender, height, there's geographic diversity, as I said, there's diversity in the type of schools that are out there, so on and so on. Just the very basic level of just the differences on the aspects of people's lives, right? And then you're talking about equity. A lot of times people, and here's another misconception, when people think about equity, they think equity and equality are one and the same. That's not the case, right? Sometimes they can be in certain situations when in order for things to be equal, there has to be some equity, and in other situations they're not, right? So equity talks about just fair treatment, right? What's fair, and that may look different in your society or whatever, but just fair treatment for everyone involved. And then when you talk about inclusion, that's the how folks feeling a part of the community, right? You know, how do they feel a part of whatever's going on? Is there a sense of belonging, a sense of community? Our voices being heard, and not even just our voices being heard, but our voices truly being listened to, right? And so those are some of the quick misconceptions when we're talking about DEI, and so you asked about things like affirmative action and critical race theory, and I'm sure we'll dive into those two things a little bit more later on, but they are a part of. They're under this big umbrella, right? There's this huge umbrella of DEI. Yes, do they fit in within that umbrella? Yes, but those are separate things within themselves, right? So they're not all one and the same, and they're not this big. We're trying to make everyone think the same and function the same. That's the complete opposite of exactly what diversity is, just difference. You know, and I think part of the issue when we talk, and I'll end it here, I think when we talk about diversity, or when we talk about difference, there's this problem. We can't be different. Unfortunately, we're all different. The four of us in here, we grew up in very different areas. We're all different ages. We have different backgrounds. Guess what? That's diversity, right? We have different educational backgrounds. That's diversity. Now, are there some things that we have similar? Of course, right? But then there are some things that are very different. So I think if we have to get, and when we're talking about DEI, we have to get past the part of if something is different, that means it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it's different.
Got you. And so what are some of the ways that Cornell College uses and implements DEI? Can you give us some examples of DEI programs at Cornell?
Yes, so our DEI program, our DEI vision has really kind of taken off, and like a lot of schools over the past 3 or 4 years, right? And so for example, my role as a senior diversity officer, this was a new role that was created about 3 or 4 years ago, and we, as an institution, we really want to focus on at the institutional level, right? Taking a step up more than student facing programs and initiatives and resources. We want to take at different policies. Want to look at how are we hiring? What are the demographics of faculty and staff on campus? Just how are the decisions that we're making at the institutional level affecting us from a diversity standpoint, right? So I would say that would be one major initiative surrounding DEI. A couple other, every year we have our employee DEI seminar, and it's not just, hey, don't say the N-word, or hey, here's what a microaggression means. Go, no. In fact, a couple of years ago, we talked about, what does critical race theory look like on a campus like ours? Like, what does it actually mean? Because how is it going to affect how we're teaching, right? And it's not just folks who are teaching, even down to our, and I hate saying down to, but over to our facilities. How are their offices being affected by DEI or critical race theory and things like that, right? Once again, hiring, the overall atmosphere, how are we creating a team atmosphere, and so on and so on, right? So, and a couple other things. One is more student based, and the other one is more faculty and staff based. But sustained dialogue. There's a organization that's called Sustained Dialogue. Then we have a chapter on campus. And basically what that is, you come up with a group, say the 4 of us want to say, hey, we want to talk about ageism, for a block. And then we'll have complete conversation. We'll set ground rules, norms, how is this going to work between the 4 of us? And as a group, we sit and talk about what does that mean to us, right? And we come there with our different viewpoints, come with our different backgrounds, and we just have literally sustained dialogue. We even talk about the difference between debating, discussion, and dialogue, right? What does that look like? And then the other one is critical conversations. And that one's once again more of a fact on the faculty and staff side. How are we having tough conversations? How are we mediating tough conversations either with students or even amongst ourselves? How are we how are we really thinking about the things that we're talking about, right? And so those, especially those latter two things, we're in a space to where we have to have tough conversations. We have to, we're having to, especially since we're talking about DEI, they're tough. Because we're talking about our identities, how we identify. These things are very important to us, and so to say that they're not going to be tough it would be me lying. So and I hate to be cliche, they're critical, right? These we have to have these conversations in order for us to properly serve our students and to properly serve ourselves.
Yeah. I want to bring in our other panelists, Nick and Jed, to talk about what DEI looks like in other contexts. Jed, I'll start with you. What does DEI look like at Kirkwood Community College, and how does that compare to your work with DEI and your leadership roles at College Community School District?
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to second what Hemi said. Thank you very much for having me here today. And I just took a sneak peek. It looks like there's about 31 participants out there. So thank you very much for getting up on a Friday morning to come listen to us speak about this. And I'm just going to say, if I'm allowed to quote the wonderful Hemi Collier, these critical conversations that we're having. So I'll give you I don't know if that's trademarked. I'll get you the 25 cents
Gotcha.
later for that.
Thank you.
So I think it's really interesting that one of the things that people are really grappling with right now is how to do this work in a meaningful and systemic way. As it started off in the beginning, a lot of people, I always like when you hear these things about like that quote we heard earlier, like for too long. I'm like, this is a relatively new endeavor that people are working on. I'm 51, so we didn't have anything like this at all when I went through public education. We sat in a desk and they gave us a worksheet and we went on our way. So I feel like this is a pretty new thing we're doing. And so we're grappling with how to do this effectively. I was looking up this morning and I wanted to just make sure I got this correct. Part of Kirkwood Community College's mission statement, it ends with to provide opportunities and support for all students to succeed. College Community School District's mission is success for all, right? And so when you have this mission statement that says success for all, or support for all students to succeed, what does that look like? How do you get to that spot where every single student feels like they can succeed? We're a public institution, which means in theory, every single one of our students should be given the support and the help that they need to be successful. And again, diversity, successful looks a lot different for a lot of different people, right? For one person, successful means I got that welding job. For another person, it means I took a couple community or continuing education courses on typing, and now I can do better at my job, and maybe I can get moved up. It's a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And so what does that mean? And so I think that's where diversity, equity, and inclusion really comes into this as a framework for looking at every single student and saying, how can we get that student to feel like they belong and they're being successful? So it's interesting that both at Kirkwood and Prairie, we've kind of taken a decentralized approach to this. And I don't think there's enough data out there yet to really kind of say this. I don't think anybody right now is saying this is the ideal way that every single school should approach this, because when you're looking at the diversity of your population, it's going to be different from every other places. When you're looking at your equity issue, it's going to be different for every single place you're at. And when you're looking at inclusion, that might be different depending on the people involved. So I think one of the things that you mentioned about me is I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion fellow. Kirkwood decided, rather than hire a DEI director, to bring in kind of different groups with human resources, within student services, and within faculty and staff, to create different groups that would then kind of infuse this thought. We did a lot of training. We've done a lot of we've gone to conferences. Last year, we went and visited a couple community colleges in Chicago that are predominantly African American to see how are they doing their tutoring and their recruiting and different things like this to help us better understand how we can help our different students and different needs. I really like what Hemi said about people a lot of times think diversity is race and maybe gender, and then they just put a period in it and then they walk away. I taught a class last year at in our Jones Hall, which is where our industrial tech people are at, because we have a lot of our welders and construction management and ag people who are not able to get their actual 2-year degree because we don't have the 6 liberal arts classes that they need available within their time frame. So for me, going to teach a history class at to our welding students, that's an equity issue, right? These students are not able to get the education they need to graduate. Well, that's problematic. So I think when you sit there and say let's like not do DEI work, you're really saying let's not help our autistic kids, let's not help our kids in the manufacturing, let's not help. I remember watching a TED talk with Sir Robinson. Dang, now I forgot his name. Yeah, it was fantastic. But he basically said a lot of times in education, we're teaching people how to become future educators. Well, if somebody doesn't want to be a future educator, but they do want an education, how do we manage that? And that's so different for everybody. And so having that lens of DEI allows you to look at certain kids in your schools and go, okay, so you don't want to be a teacher, you want to be an accountant, or you want to be this or that or the other thing. How can we help you individually? A lot of people are calling these individualized learning. That's a phrase going around right now in education, and I think DEI dovetails really nicely in there. How do you look at each individual kid and say, these are your needs that you need to be successful? And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, I mean, I'm just going to say this and then I'll let Nick go. If we're really going to be honest with ourselves and say our motto is success for all, then we have to do this work. We have to dig in deep. I'm grateful. For many years, I wanted to be a little violent towards people that said, well, we've got a changing demographic. I'm like, no. Our demographic is what it is. It's not changing. This is who we have. These are the students we have at Kirkwood. These are the students we have at Prairie. These are the humans in our community, in our neighborhood. Let's not bemoan what, oh, well, 30 years ago, we couldn't have done an online conference like this, right? 30 years ago, we didn't have all these ways to do things that we can do now and that we can make an impact in kids' lives. So I just really feel strongly that that at Kirkwood and at Prairie, I think we've got this kind of, at least it seems to me, and I'm pretty involved in it, from top to again, sorry, Hemi, top to bottom, side to side. Let's not do that. Everyone seems to be like, let's step up and find ways that we can have each kid feel like they belong and they can be successful. And you're not going to do that unless you use a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in a lot of that work.
Nick, you taught high school social studies at Ankeny High School for 10 years. I want to get your perspective about what DEI looks like in secondary education and the role that it plays.
Sure. Yeah, so of course, thanks for having me here. I just want to point out an elephant in the room, perhaps. This is a perspective that I would have as somebody who would, as a participant, if I were watching this, to kind of point out that a DEI panel that is 3/4 just white guys and all of us kind of cisgender guys to begin with. I just wonder, too, if maybe either in the future or something else, we could even bring on student representation to talk about their own experiences to this. So just kind of keeping in mind, too, that all of this is sort of filtered through our own lens with that as well. And perhaps even a little bit later, we can talk about the role that, especially for Jed, Tom, and I, as just, white dudes in Iowa, play in actually supporting and bolstering this work as well by leveraging our own power and privilege in these contexts. But yeah, I would say at the high school level, I found it a little bit frustrating that that the DEI work seemed to be done away in an office somewhere, and it was expected that we would teach the standards and somebody else would do diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was really when I took my role seriously in that work to say, okay, how can we actually bring diverse perspectives on here, or anti-racist perspectives in particular? that is when I started to get involved in a lot more admin meetings than I ever had in the history of my career, to say, well, you can't teach about this, that, or the other thing, because of the way that it would make certain people feel in the student body. So, for example, teaching about white nationalism in the context of nationalist movements in the world today. I think a lot of white nationalist violence exists in the United States. It's an important thing to talk about in a history social studies class, and teaching about those topics is what got me more heat than anything I ever taught about in the history of my career. But in the bigger scheme, I just think in Iowa in particular, that we set our students up for failure if we don't address these so-called divisive concepts or these difficult topics, that then they will go off either to universities in Iowa or outside of Iowa, as we've seen a lot of the brain drain with young people in particular, where then they go to campuses with people who don't look like them and have different experiences than them, and they aren't prepared to be members of those communities, because, well, now they're having to learn everything from scratch. They're coming to it from an outsider perspective with no real concept of how the world outside of the mythology that we've developed in Iowa as a primarily rural, primarily white, primarily older demographic is. So it leaves our students incapable, if we're thinking through the lens of, say, college and career readiness, to actually engage in college and career work, because it's messy and it's complicated. Yeah, so I think at the high school level, we play just as much of a role as preparing kids for that next level as the work that happens at the college level as well.
We have a question here from the audience. Can you talk about how you understand, and maybe most importantly, share disparities around equity, given the current fear people have about talking about race and gender in particular?
Yeah, addressed to me at the,
Well,
say,
I
at
mean,
the
I guess
secondary level.
I was going to throw it to the group, but if you want to start.
Oh gosh, okay. I think, I left the high school teaching in June of 2022, in part as a result of the divisive concept laws and things that were passed, as I began to see the chilling effect that it played, because I felt that I started to stand up more and more, and I saw my colleagues kind of close their door and stand down more and more. So I think it really created this disparity where teachers who stood up and said, no, I'm going to continue to advocate for these ideas and these issues and teach them to my kids, then at the same time, had the heat applied to them, kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. My cat is very involved in this conversation right now. But then at the same time, seeing people who want to close their doors and pretend that it's not there. So I think kids are really getting a disparity in their education between people who want to ignore it and pretend it's not there, and people who really want to embrace it and teach it in a way that's fair and in reality.
Jed or Hemi, I guess anything else to add to that?
You got it, Jed.
All right. I just say, I think the important thing to the first thought that came to my mind when I heard that question was that we're not going to help our population and our students unless we use words that are very specific. So when we look at our retention and our graduation rates at Kirkwood, our lowest percentage of students are Black men. So if you just say, we're just going to do this diversity kind of thing that just kind of does this stuff, and you're not actually looking again at the personalized, like, how are we actually impacting these students or these individuals? How are we impacting our Native American students? Are we giving them the supports they need? So I think it is difficult, but I also think that, like, the most important thing we can do is sit down and actually look at the laws that are being passed and say, okay, well, you know what? There hasn't been a law passed yet that says we can't be nice to our Native American students, right? We can't have a support group, and we can't reach out and have tutoring and things like this. So I think a lot of people are seeing the laws and saying, oh, this means like Nick just said, they're shutting the door and say, I just don't want to get anywhere close to that. But I think it's important to understand what actually are they saying you can't do, and then saying, okay, well, then we'll still do everything else that we can do. We don't have to just stop everything because these three things are being shut down.
And I'll try to go quick. The way I would answer that question is, honestly, I would go back to, Nick, you brought up a great point of, when you said, let's address the elephant in the room. There are three white dudes in here and four men and having this conversation, and there's not a lot of representation. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, not exact quote, right? But that's part of why having this conversation around DI is important. Being able to recognize that, right? Hey, there's something missing within this conversation, right? There's something. There are other people outside of me who have different experiences, right? There are folks who live differently than me, and not that it's bad because it's different, but just understanding we're different, right? There's, saying there are more people within this conversation. And in terms of talking about with it being difficult, it's being very honest, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult having to, you're constantly having pushback, but I think that's part of the process, right? I'm a sports guy, right? Love sports and all that. And, when Michael Jordan in 96 was doing all these things, right? That was part of the reason why they were so good, because they had to go through difficult things, right? It sucks. No one wants to have to sit here and push and fight and prod and do all these things. But I think that's part of the growth, right? That's part of the growth that we need to do as a society. We need to have these conversations, and it's going to be difficult. As I said earlier, we're talking about people's identities and how they function and how they live and what they're passionate about. This is right, this is wrong. But we have to do this work. We have to do the work of educating all types of students, right? We have to do this work of educating all types of people. So while it is difficult, it's needed. It's something that we have to do.
Yeah. Jed, you're one of the faculty advisors for Kirkwood Community College's Black Student Union and are helping to create a African-American history course at Kirkwood. Why and what have been some of the challenges with that?
Well, I'll tell you, it's hard to say these things without, again, the elephant in the room. I'm a white guy, straight, married. I mean, I've got 12 kids, so that puts me out of the norm, but for the most part, I'm pretty normal. And I care deeply about each one of my students, and I want them to be successful, and it matters to me. And when you see a certain group of students kind of failing consistently over a long time, you go, well, what is, and I liked how this has already been brought up a couple of times, the systemic or the institutional things that we're doing that perhaps are not being helpful. And last year, we had a panel for Black History Month where we had 8 amazing students on this panel, and they're asking questions about Kirkwood. And the one thing that each one of them said in a different way was, I like Kirkwood, I like my classes, I have friends, it's great. I'm literally the only Black person in every single class I'm in. And that really hit me hard. And I started really thinking about that and leaning into that. And I did a lot of research, and then like shortly thereafter that went to a conference, the League of Innovation conference, and went to a lot of different sessions on this. And just the overarching necessity is, and I think this is true for all of us, you want to be in a space where you don't have to like be somebody else. You can just be yourself, and you can just be with people that are like you, and you can share ideas, and not entirely like you. You can share ideas. You can kind of feel like you don't have to like code mesh or code change. You can just kind of like be yourself. And so that's kind of what we're really doing at Kirkwood, is trying to create spaces where our Black students can just be together as a group. And so having a Black student union is a physical space. Having an African American history class where you are in the classroom and the content is about you, you're the hero of the story. You are learning about yourself and who you are, and you're doing it with people that are similar to you. This is vital to feeling a sense of inclusion and belonging, is having at least, it doesn't have to be everywhere, but there have to be at least some spaces where you can walk in there and just kind of like take a breath and be yourself and not have to like perform for the people around you. And so really, I think that's been kind of one of the things we've been really working hard on at Kirkwood, and Prairie is also investing some resources into this, is trying to find spaces and places where students, and then this becomes a model, so we can do that with other groups of students, and just creating these spaces where people can come, and again, it doesn't have to be the whole thing, but if there's some spaces where students can feel like, okay, I can just be myself and I can learn and I can grow and I can be here with people who are in a similar situation to me, that can be very meaningful.
So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's been campaigning aggressively in Iowa and built a brand of fighting so-called woke indoctrination in education, announced earlier this year that Florida would bar public schools from participating in a pilot of the College Board's new AP course in African American Studies. The governor held that Black history shouldn't be taught as a standalone course, and that Florida law already mandates that Black history be covered in standard U.S. history curriculum. The NAACP has condemned the move, saying that the dismissal of the course amounted to a dereliction of duty to ensure equitable education for all Floridians, and show as a disdain for the lives and experiences that form part of our national history. I bring it up because it seems to speak to this kind of purported dichotomy between academic rigor and the role that equity plays in this debate, right? That diversity, equity, and inclusion is seen as quote unquote indoctrination that distracts from traditional learning and teaching the basics or fundamentals, right? Reading, writing, math, science, history, civics, etc. I guess, Jed, as an educator, when we talk about arming students with a range of analytical and critical thinking skills, I guess, how does DEI and for example, African American Studies courses come into play, and how do they translate to this idea of rigor and academic success?
Well, I'll try to make this short. I could go for about 4 days responding to this. I did the terrible thing that as soon as I say this, everyone's going to cringe. But just for fun last night, I went into Chat GPT and I typed in why take an African American history class in college, and the list was just beautiful. It was amazing, and I think I've got it here. Let's see if I can pull it up here on my other thing. Yeah, and it understanding the context of history, culture, identity, and connection, awareness of heritage, empowerment, building a community, challenging stereotypes, and also appreciating achievements and learning from past activism and challenging stereotypes, promoting inclusivity, understanding cultural diversity. There's a long list of things that just pops up. And these are all really, really true. These I think for me, I don't think anybody in the world would tell you, I mean, probably there'd be some people, but I think most of us would agree that if the best way to learn about the world is to travel, right? To go and to be around different people, right? I think all of us that have managed to get out of the country and go to other places, you have these experiences where you're with other people who have different thoughts, and it makes you think about yourself and not to change who you are, but sometimes you go, okay, no, this thought I had, yeah, I agree with it, or this thought I had, maybe I could have a little wider view on things. And so if we're not able to literally take our students around the globe every year in public education, we can bring the globe to them, and we can bring experiences to them, and we can share with them different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing. And I think that an African American history class is really a good way to do that. It's a good way. It shifts the narrative. It shifts the story. It's the same story. It's still American history, but it's from a different perspective. It's through a different lens, and that gives you just a different way of seeing things. You look at like the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution. Well, if you're looking at that through the lens of white politicians, that looks different than if you're looking at it through the lens of others. And so I think that it impacted. And so I think kind of having these courses, and I have to say I'm actually good friends with many of the people that put the AP African American History course together, and they're all amazing, brilliant people who have done nothing but think deeply about this subject. and done their best to help students across America have a better understanding of, really, can I just say it? We call it African American history. It's actually just American history, and it's just a different viewpoint on American history that I think is just as important as any other lens that we can look at American history through. I always love that. I'm like, I'm going to keep this short, and then I just
no. It's all good. I mean, it's a good discussion. It's a good perspective, and I appreciate that. So I'm just gonna, I guess, throw this question to the group. You know, what are the risks that these culture wars pose to Iowa's colleges and universities, and what impact could this have if students align with like-minded colleges or avoid states where majority party politics differ from their own?
I think some of the impacts that we could have, honestly, is a lot of we've been talking about, not allowing students to see the complete picture, right? And so there's one thing that stood out to me as you were talking, Jed. When you're explaining, why it's important to have African American history and have these created spaces and so on and so on. And I'm going to speak just from my personal experience as a Black male walking into these type of classes, right? It's a little nerve-wracking, right? It's a little like, okay, all right, this is new for me. But it provides a sense of comfort. It provides a sense of, okay, a debriefing, so to speak, right? A decompressing, so to speak, type of space, and then on top of that, I think with with African American classes, it provides a sense of pride, right? It tells a part of the story that isn't always told. If we're being honest, it tells the part of as you said, Jed, the part of the story that's not always told properly. There's bits and pieces left out of it, right? And so, for example, hey, we can talk about the Civil Rights Movement or Civil Rights Act of 1964, but if we don't talk about how we got there, we're missing the importance of the civil rights of that act, right? If we don't talk about the importance of how do we get to the 13th Amendment, we're missing a complete part of the story. So if you don't tell that part of the story in depth, right? Yeah, yes, it is a part of American history, and you can glance over, hey, there's slavery, and then you go and you just glance over it. We're not telling the complete part of the story, right? We're not telling the whole movie. We're not telling. It's just like if we're watching Marvel movies, right? At some point, you get a new character. That character is going to get an origin story, right? They're going to get their own movie. It's going to like 6 movies long, and then all of a sudden they're going to tie it all the way together, right? And if we don't tell the origin story of the Civil Rights Act, 13th Amendment, so on and so on, we're completely missing. We're completely missing the boat. So not having these things, not creating these spaces is I think it's a detriment to your students, right? Just because you're allowing your students to have, and I know it's a super buzzword, and I hate using buzzwords, but yes, it is a safe space. It is a space for where you take a step out of, right? I'm going to take it off race and ethnicity and gender, right? So say we're all talking football. Every now and then I want to sit in a room and I want to talk to people who know football, who know the ins and outs of the game. We can talk about all the different things and so on and so on. And then you go to the regular people who watch it only on Sundays and Saturdays, right? Every now and then that's okay. That's not saying that those folks who don't really know the game in and out is less than. It's just sometimes I want to have a conversation with other coaches. Same thing. Sometimes, women want to have a space. Hey, I just want to go talk about, how you feeling as a woman with other women, because they understand that, or insert your identity and so on and so on. So no, it's not othering folks. It's not, putting folks out to the side and, knowing, and we don't care if you're there. Yes. Sometimes you folks need that space, and then we come back together.
I couldn't possibly love that anymore, Amy. That was awesome. And now I'm wanting your 6 movie backstory.
Oh, mine's gonna be like 7.
Can I speak to this just very briefly in the sense that kids shouldn't have to wait to college to also experience these things? Absolutely. Because not every kid also goes to college. So I think I think there's a bit of a problem in the sense that having the College Board, a national nonprofit organization that makes $1 billion a year, mind you, controls what the African American history curriculum looks like for the entire country, and then can be influenced in such a way by governors in different states. Why should the governor of Florida determine what students in Iowa learn in their AP curriculum, for example? But I think, right, if we're waiting to college to have kids in Iowa high schools experience these stories, to make these connections, that's too late. I mean, that's what happened to me as an Iowa high school. And then as a UNI grad, my African-American history course with Dr. Baskerville, rest in peace, was really the first time that I was able to hear in his own words, right, the experience of a Black man growing up in the United States. I still recall him telling the story of how he got the job at UNI basically over the phone. He, in his own words, he sounded white. So when he showed up, it was a big surprise that this big Black guy walked into the office, because they had coded his speech as a white guy walking in the door. And the relationship that I was able to build with him and just had a lot of rapport and trust, and the discussions that we had were really vital just to me opening my eyes for the very, first time, because I didn't have that experience as a high school student. So I think the more that we rob K-12 kids of diverse experiences, perspectives, that harms them later on, because maybe they go to DMAC in my neck of the woods, or Kirkwood or whatever, and they don't get a 4-year degree, right? They go into trades and then they move on with the rest of their life. They haven't had those experiences. So the more that we can actually bring them to teenagers in middle and high school, elementary school, the better off everyone's going to be anyway.
And if I can add to that real quick to Nick's point, if we wait till college, right, it is too late, and I know sometimes we like to think that kids don't see things. Kids see things very clearly, right? Like an 8-year-old white kid can look at an 8-year-old Black kid and we look different. Now, they may not understand why, they may not understand what that means, but they can clearly see something's different about how we look, right? So he's XYZ, right? And so I think if we wait to explain what that difference means, as Nick said, it's too late. Now now they get to that point, and now we've allowed them to think, oh, we're all the same, and all of a sudden there's some differences, and that's where we come into issues. And so to think that kids can physically see there are certain differences, and once again, I know I'm talking about race, but that could literally be any type of difference, so to speak, within people. It's crazy for us to think that kids don't see that.
And can I just hop in one more second real quick? I'll make this super short. I do also want to say that I read recently that they're saying that kids that were born in 2006, 2007 are going to live, their average lifespan is going to be 100 years old.
Oh, God bless.
That's my twins. They're going to be, their average lifespan is going to be 100 years old. They're going to have to learn how to learn, because they're going to have their careers disrupted numerous times over the span of their life. So if they don't learn how to learn, and if they don't learn how to learn in a diverse way, if they don't learn how to interact with different people in different ways, they're going to come up into roadblocks throughout the rest of their life. So it's not even just about like making them better humans, which it is, but it's also about saying, are we actually preparing these kids for 60, 70, 80 years in the workforce that they might be in? Who knows what it's going to look like then? Are we preparing them with the skills they're going to have to work with a diverse workforce and to work with diverse people? We've brought ageism in here a couple of times, right? How are you going to learn when you're 75 and you're working with a 25-year-old? There's things you got to figure out, right? And so I just wanted to add that this becomes weighty, and that it's not, when people say we just want to teach them math, sure, yes, I'm not opposed to teaching math. I think it's great. But if you only know math, you're going to have a lot of problems in the rest of your life getting where you want to get.
Yeah. Just a reminder that if you have a question, to submit that in the Q&A chat in Whova. We'll do our best to get to all the questions that we can. Nick, I want to come back to you. The New York Times over the weekend had a story about a former student of yours at Ankeny High School and his family moving to Minnesota because of anti-trans legislation banning gender-affirming care in Iowa. I guess, what was your reaction to seeing that story, to seeing a former student and his family seek refuge across state lines? And I guess more importantly, what does that portend for the state, particularly one that struggles to keep college graduates from moving out of the state?
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, it's hard not to think about it without getting a little bit worked up. Again, it's a student I had as a sophomore in my AP European history class. Great student, incredible artist. I literally purchased artwork from them and the collaborations that they were involved in. And yeah, to have that be the follow-up to see what had happened. If you pull up the New York Times article, there's a picture of him and his family right there in the moving truck. And yeah, it's heartbreaking just to see how we've put such a fine target on the back of young Iowans who are already such a vulnerable, such a marginalized, so at risk for bullying, for the other mental health issues that are associated with the inequitable structures and systems that surround them. That we would involve the state and require that their teachers be accomplices in that too. That certainly is something that broke my heart when I heard that story, and really made me grateful that I was in a position to get to know that student and to hopefully be an influence on them. But I will also say that they were not the only trans student that I've had in my career in the classroom, and certainly not the last one that I even had in my last year teaching. I think, to Jed's point earlier, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are becoming increasingly more comfortable, with being themselves in public, in school. Their friends and their classmates are more tolerant than they've ever been before. And I think there's a real distinction between the direction that elected officials want to take this state and the solidarity that young people have with each other and their trans friends. I think we're going to really have to decide which direction we want to go as a state, if we want to continue to alienate and isolate the best and brightest among us because they happen to be transgender is a real mistake, I think. But yeah, it was heartbreaking to see that follow up, and a boon to Minnesota because now they're going to get to benefit from having that young person in their communities, in their education system, attending their universities, potentially working up there as well. Kind of another success story for them and another L for Iowa.
Yeah, so I guess I get to my next question. I guess, how can DEI help Iowa combat its brain drain and the departure of college students to other states? What role can it play with regards to that?
I'll cede to you guys on this if you want to start with that.
I'll just say real quick, I think it's Tahimi's point, it's hard work. Because what you have to do on a personal level is, as a teacher, as an administrator, as a custodian, whoever you are in the district, you have to convince these kids that you care about them and that they're important, and you have to create space for them to have a voice. I think the schools that are doing well are the schools where the students have a voice and are able to speak for themselves. We've mentioned this a bunch, right? You have to be able to be heard, but you can't be heard if you're not speaking. And so I think the schools that are doing that are being somewhat successful. But it's a fight, because you have to say, hey, every sentence has to start off with, we know our government is actively working against you, but we are going to still be here for you, right? And so every time you have to start a sentence with the student like, I know that I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to do this, but I know that I'm not, per Iowa law, I'm not supposed to care about your gender, but you do, and I care about you. So therefore, how do we navigate through that? but that means every conversation has to be seen through that lens. And so I think at some point you're going to have students who are going to just say, I don't want to be seen through that lens. I don't want to have these conversations. And the ones that can get out are going to get out, and the ones that can't are going to suffer, and we're going to lose. To Nick's point, hooray for Minnesota, well done. They just got an amazing human being. How do we keep these people here? It's difficult to do when the message coming out of the legislature is, we don't actually really want you to be who you are. And like it's been said, these kids now are getting a lot more comfortable with saying, no, this is who I am, and I'm not going to hide who I am. And so if you and for some you can, others you just can't. You can't hide, being autistic. You can't, you can't. So I'm just not going to be autistic today. I'm going to present as a non-autistic. You can't do that. You can't. And so to say we're going to get rid of DEI efforts, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to put these stipulations on, it becomes really hard for a lot of these students. And I think those of us that are still fighting this are going to have to keep fighting, but it is going to be a fight. And the kids are in the middle and they know it's a fight. And to Hemi's point, they know who's for them and who's not.
I will say this. I think we have to first understand that the brain drain is happening. For those who don't really understand what brain drain means, so it's basically when people are leaving to go somewhere else. Right? If I'm making it the very, very simple terms, we have to be honest with ourselves as a state. Like, hey, our kids are leaving the state after they graduate, for whatever reason. And in terms of DEI, they're like the young student that Nick had left because they didn't feel safe here. And that's a problem, and as a state, if you're telling your students, if you're telling your people that if you're going to stay here and you fit this, you're not safe, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. You're not wanted. That's a problem. So I think we have to, as a state, as a complete society, I would say there's a problem. Our young people are leaving for this reason. And before we even can start coming up with changing anything, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, this is happening. So yeah, that's why I think that's how we can combat that.
Yeah.
I'll reiterate this real quick, Tom. Is this okay?
Go ahead.
We need to make a choice about what kind of state we want to be,
Exactly.
right? Are we a state just for old, white, rural identifying people, or are we going to be a state for all Iowans and make policy solutions that align with that? And as far as DEI goes, we all need to play a role in making the state safer and more inclusive for the people who are here and make people want to come here. We all play a role in DEI work. It just doesn't exist in an office someplace on a campus, right? Those are important roles, but all of us as citizens, as educators, in all the roles that we play, are going to either contribute, right, to more inclusive, diverse, equitable environments through our actions, our policies, et cetera, or we're going to exclude, right, and we're going to create inequalities, and we're going to lead to homogeneity, right? So we have that choice that we have to make, and our actions are going to reinforce that.
Absolutely.
Nick, I really appreciate that, because as we wrap up this discussion, I want to talk about what Iowans can do to move progress forward on this issue. And we do have a question from the audience. I work with small businesses through a free government program. I've tried to get more diversity in my groups with almost zero success. What is the best way to get individuals to get involved? I've gone face-to-face, got interest, but the individuals almost never show up at free networking events.
Well,
I'll throw it to the group. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, I think you have to, for one, make sure you show your intentionality, right? And one of the biggest things in people trusting you, they have to show that you're truly intentional, you truly mean what you're saying, right? And whoever asks the question, not saying that you're not, but this is one step, right? And then two, I think you have to show like what's how is whatever that you're trying to do, how is this going to be of interest and of them and you, right? And And that can look a lot of different ways. It could be, hey, just being part, as Nick said, just it's just all of our work. Let's get involved in the community. Or it could be financial, it could be whatever it is. Or how are you showing interest to the people that you're trying to serve? And two, I think in order to and if I'm hearing the question correctly, how are you going about diversifying either your workforce or diversifying the folks that you're working with? You have to go directly to the people that you're trying to that you want in your space. It can't necessarily be, hey, I'm going to go to Nick. Hey, Nick, could you ask Jed if Jed could ask Tom to? No, I need to go directly to Tom and say, hey, Tom, I need you here. And here's why I need you here. And here's what we can go from there. So I think if you start there and go do those specific things, now, is that the end all and be all? Absolutely not, right? No, but that's a good start in terms of how can you get folks involved in whatever you're doing.
All right. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just take inventory of any potential barriers. Are there linguistic barriers? Are there accessibility barriers? For ability and disability? Are there, people who just don't feel safe going into public spaces now because they are immunocompromised and COVID is still a thing? Are people just don't want to enter a predominantly white space? Are there, right? So kind of consider the different ways that you can actually meet people where they are at and evaluate your own barriers instead of wonder why a certain group of people that you want to appeal to aren't interested in interacting with your organization. Kind of take inventory of yourself. And I think then if you start to build those spaces and be intentional, to Hemi's point, then I think you'll see the groups and people that you're interested in working with have a lot more interest in meeting you halfway with that.
Yeah. We've approached our time, but I do want to get to one last question because I think it's a really important one. What does it look like to use your power privilege to take action and fight for students, ensuring that dehumanizing policies don't take root?
God, that's a great question.
Right.
In the interest of time, I'll answer this, right? It's about seeing, right? In Ankeny in particular, I said, hey, I have 10 years of experience. I was a local union leader. I knew a lot of administration. I had a lot of social capital. And as I'm 6'4", big, tall, white guy, I wasn't afraid of, the intimidation, frankly, that is kind of endemic in our politics now, too. So I felt competent. I felt secure. So I stood up in spaces both for students during book bannings, for example. I could go support them and be in physical space to help them feel more safe and secure in airing their opinions. And then just, being an advocate in virtual spaces, at school board meetings, writing letters to the editor, just leveraging my own skills and abilities and time that I have for people who may not be able to do that. So again, that's not about saying my opinion is the thing that matters, but it's, hey, how can I push the envelope a little bit to make safer spaces for people to either step up or ensure that I can take the heat so someone else can be working and doing, their own, leveraging their own power and privilege in their own context. So it's really just seeing, hey, where's my social capital? Where's my political capital? Where can I start to make leverage in this and just chip away at that area? And then eventually either people will follow or you'll make space so they can do work on their own. So I think that's a big part of it.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Nick Covington, Hemi Collier, Jed Peterson, and thank you to our audience for your questions and your interest. And thank you to our Iowa Ideas sponsors, ITC Midwest, ACT, Inclusive ICR, and Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust. Our next session in the higher education track starts at 9:40 a.m., and that session is titled Reimagining the Delivery of Higher Education in Iowa. I'm Tom Barton. Thank you so much for attending. And again, thank you so much for our panelists. Really appreciate the discussion. Thanks, guys.